Hi everybody and welcome back to the shed, where today we're going to be working on getting these inlays put into the fretboard. If you're new here, we're currently working on this custom Thinline bass guitar. We're quite a way along with the body and we're trying to get the neck kind of up to a similar level. So stay tuned and I'll show you exactly how to get these beautiful mother of pearl markers inlaid. And while we're here, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Okay, let's do it. We left last time having just got this board fitted onto the neck and the routing done for the binding. The next thing we need to do is to get the radius onto this board in preparation for finally fitting these inlays. We're pretty much there with the inlays. There are one or two kind of little gaps that will need a little bit of fill when we get round to that stage. But as I explained in the last episode, that is pretty standard for this kind of job and I'm not at all concerned about having to do that. But for the start of this episode at least, the focus is going to be on getting the radius on the board. So we'll just kind of pull these markers out again for the time being. If I can, they're a little bit tight in places. There we go. And we'll just pull the fretboard off its locating pins. There we go. And we can look to start work on this. Now this is going to have a 12-inch radius, which is pretty standard for me. And I'm going to go about this in a couple of stages. First stage is I'm going to fasten this down onto the bench and I'm going to take a hand plane and take the bulk of the material off, because you can sand forever on these things and it's just really, really labour intensive. And I'll be honest, I don't really enjoy it that much. So I'll take quite a bit of the material off with the plane. However, we do need some sanding dust for when we are fitting the inlays, because that's going to form the basis of the fill that will make it all look lovely and uniform. So once I've done the planing, I'll break out my little fretboard sanding jig, get that aligned, then use a 12-inch radius sanding block just to finish that off. Luckily, this is built for guitar fretboards, but the bass fretboard just fits on. So that's really, really good. But that's for a little bit down the line. So first things first, we'll get this fastened onto the end of the bench where I know it's pretty flat, and break out a hand plane. And just make sure that that's all stuck down nice and securely. I've got a number 4 plane for this for no other reason than this is probably the sharpest plane I've got available to me at the moment. I've backed the iron right out and I'm just going to bring in the merest touch of cut. I've planed this material on the edges and it planed really nice, so I'm hoping that it'll be as good on the face as well. Handily. It's actually planing better in that direction, but it's very awkward for me. So I'm going to pull this off the bench and just stick it down the other way. That's better. Now, one thing I'm going to have to be a little bit careful of, because this board has been tapered already, I'm going to be more inclined to be planing along that taper. And the problem I might have if I do that is that I'll actually introduce a compound radius onto this board, which isn't necessarily something I want in this case. If it was still square and I was planing straight up and down it, that would create a more consistent radius, but that taper will affect what I'm doing. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to take too much off with the plane, because the sanding block will put me a nice even radius on. I'm trying my best to kind of go straight up and down, but it is difficult with the taper in place. Hopefully you can see there, we're actually quite close. There's kind of maybe a mil in the middle, so we need to take off a little bit more material on the edges, but I think we're close enough now that we can actually start sanding this in rather than doing it with the plane. So again, we'll get this off the bench and get our little jig set up. And that's all set up now. Again, just lots and lots of super glue and masking tape. And I've got a 12-inch radius block. I've got some 60 grit on one side and some 120 on the other side. Basically, it's just a case of getting it in the jig, trying your best to keep everything nice and level. And starting to sand it in. And I'm going to be stopping at quite a regular interval. And I'm just going to take this little brush and kind of brush as much of this as I can onto this little bit of paper, because we are going to need a fair bit of rosewood dust when we fit the inlays. And I'm getting quite close with this now, so I'm just going to put a bunch of pencil kind of all over this. And then when I go back with my block, that's going to show me very, very quickly how far I've got to go. And you can see mostly there's just a little stripe up the middle, and it's mainly kind of at this end. So I'm going to focus up here for a little while, then I'll flip it over and start to kind of clean things up a little bit with this finer grit. And then we're very, very nearly here now, so I've just got some fresh 120 grit onto the block, and we'll just work down the last little bit. And hopefully you can see there, all that pencil's gone, which would indicate we've got a nice even finish along that board. So I'll clean up the rest of this dust. We can get this out the jig, and then we're probably going to have to do a little bit of work just reinstating the fret slots to their full depth again. And I've just set this up on a little bit of wood just to give it a bit of clearance over the top of the bench. And I've set the little fence on the fret slotting saw up so it's the same depth as the tang on the frets. And I'm thinking mostly we'll be okay, but where we've removed material along the edge, we're probably just going to be a little bit low on the slots. So we'll just open them up a little bit. And because this is going to be a bound fretboard, I'm going to take this opportunity to do a step that I kind of forgot in the last one, and it made life a little bit more difficult. Is I'm just going to take this small triangular file and just ever so slightly open up the top of each fret slot. and that will just help me locate my frets a bit easier when the time comes for that. With that done, it's finally time to get the inlays in. And fitting these markers is going to be kind of a bit of a two-stage affair. And the first one is actually going to be kind of sticking it in position. And for that, I'm just going to use some normal super glue. Stick that in there. I don't want to put too much in because I don't want it to kind of like flood the cavity totally. And then I can just measure to make sure that we're kind of central, which is where we are. We'll just let that set up for a minute, and then I've saved a whole heap of this rosewood dust from the sanding process, and I'm just going to take a tiny little bit of that. I'm just going to kind of rub it in all the way around that marker. And I'm going to just mask off the rest of the fretboard. As much as anything, this is to keep it out of the fret slot because we don't want to be kind of filling those up with anything. And then I'm going to take some water thin super glue, and I've got a little micro applicator attached to the bottle, and I'm just going to wick a little bit of that into that dust around the edge, and just let that dry up a little minute. And what will happen is that really thin super glue will just soak right the way through that rosewood dust, and if it wasn't already held in place firmly enough, that will absolutely lock it in position. Let's get rid of our masking tape so I can just check I've got the right marker. Just rinse and repeat. Obviously, I think it goes without saying that I've ensured that all the dust and everything is out of these little sockets, so I know I'm getting these into exactly the right place. Okay, so they're all glued in now, and I've left them for kind of a good hour or so, just to make sure all that super glue's dried up nicely. The glue around where I've put the dust as filler, that will dry almost instantly. There's kind of a chemical reaction between the glue and the oils in the rosewood dust, and that will kind of act as an accelerator. So I'm pretty confident everything's good and dry. So I'm just going to take my big sanding block again with the 120 paper, and there's no real need to put it in the jig, because I know that as soon as I kind of flush these down to the surrounding board, I'm where I need to be. So that should hopefully keep things nice and straight. And I'm going to be hoovering this up on a regular basis, because this mother of pearl dust is, yeah, horrible. So we don't really want to be breathing that in. And we've got that down now. It's kind of very nearly flush. There's just a little bit of excess. So I'm just going to go now. I've got a 150 pad on here. And I'm just going to start kind of cleaning up with that, just to get rid of the last little bits of unevenness. I'm really not taking any kind of amount of material off here, just flushing everything down so it's nice and smooth. And then I'm going to change out to a 180 pad, take it down a little bit further. And then once I get everything down to 180, I'll then start working my way through the grits. And what I'm aiming to do is to get this all nicely polished up, so both the mother of pearl and the rosewood take on a bit of a luster and a bit of a sheen. So that's done to 1200 grit now. I'm just going to, I'm not going to go mad at this stage, but give them a quick flick over with some first 3000 Trizact, and then a bit of 6000 just to give it that final polish. And I think that will do for the time being. Looking nice and glossy. I'm really happy with the way that they've gone in. I will get the other camera set up and do some close-ups. And hopefully you can see there that they're all kind of super tight fitting now. Look very nice. Really happy with them. And I think anywhere where there is a little bit of fill, it's very hard to notice. I think next up on this is we can get this reunited with the neck, possibly glued on, and then we can look at getting the binding fitted to both this and the headstock and get some frets in. However, all of that is going to be for future episodes, so I think I will call this one a day here. So as always, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you in a few days' time when we can get this all glued up. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.